It is 4:30 a.m., April 12, 1861. A single mortar shell streaks across the sky of Charleston Harbor. It's not just a shot, it's a signal. The blueprint of a nation is being torn in half. Over the next 30 minutes, we are deconstructing the first 2 years of the bloodiest conflict in American history, not just the dates, but the strategic DNA of the war that nearly ended the United States. It's the question that has haunted American military academies for over 160 years. How did a society built on a warrior culture, led by some of the finest tactical minds in history, suffer a total, unconditional collapse? Most people will tell you it was about numbers. More men, more factories, more miles of railroad. But numbers don't tell the whole story. If numbers were everything, the American colonies should never have beaten the British Empire. The South didn't just lose because they were smaller. They lost because their strategic blueprint was fundamentally broken from the first shot fired at Fort Sumter. Today, we are declassifying the structural failures, the intelligence blunders, and the lost orders that ensured the Confederacy's destruction. You're watching Blueprint Defense. To understand the collapse, we have to look at the two competing blueprints for victory in 1861. In the North, President Abraham Lincoln and General Winfield Scott drafted the Anaconda Plan. It was mocked by the press as being too slow. They wanted a 90-day war. But Scott's blueprint was genius. It wasn't about winning one big battle. It was about strangling the life out of the South, blockading every port and seizing the Mississippi River. In the South, the blueprint was entirely different. It was a defensive-offensive strategy. They didn't need to conquer the North. They just needed to not lose. They were waiting for a Saratoga moment, one big victory that would force England or France to intervene and save them. But here is the fatal flaw no one talks about. The South's blueprint relied on a ghost. They believed King Cotton was so powerful that the world economy would collapse without them. They were wrong. And that single miscalculation was the first brick in their wall of failure. While the South banked on King Cotton, the North had been silently building an industrial behemoth. This wasn't just about big numbers. It was about systems. The Union had 90% of the nation's manufacturing capacity. They could churn out rifles, cannon, uniforms, and shoes almost on demand. For every rifle the South could produce, the North could make 20. This was a war not just of men, but of material. The Confederacy, on the other hand, was an agrarian society. They had cotton, yes, but very few factories, limited ironworks, and almost no heavy industry capable of sustaining a modern war effort. Their blueprint was designed for defense, but defense requires supply lines, repairs, and constant resupply. Their agricultural strength became their greatest weakness, as they struggled to feed armies while their crops rotted or were blockaded. Transportation was another Achilles heel. The Union boasted over 22,000 miles of railroad track. Not only did they have more, but their railway gauges were largely standardized, making troop and supply movement incredibly efficient. They could move an entire corps from Washington, D.C. to a battlefront in days, resupplying them as they went. The South had barely 9,000 miles of track, and critically, these were a patchwork of different gauges. What did this mean? It meant that supplies often had to be unloaded from one train, transferred by wagon to another track, and reloaded. Imagine the time, the manpower, the chaos. When vital supplies were needed at the front lines, they were often stuck in a logistical nightmare hundreds of miles away. Their blueprint for movement was a tangled mess, preventing them from ever truly concentrating their forces or reacting swiftly to Union advances. By 1862, the Anaconda Plan was no longer a punchline in Southern newspapers. It was a noose. The Union Navy, once a skeleton crew, had ballooned into a fleet of hundreds. They didn't just wait, they evolved. The era of wooden ships ended in a single afternoon at Hampton Roads, where iron-plated monsters proved that the southern coast was now a prison. For every blockade runner that slipped through with luxury goods, 10 more stayed rotted at the docks, their cotton turning into worthless mountains of white gold. While the Navy choked the coast, the Western theater ignited. A relatively unknown general named Ulysses S. Grant began carving a path down the Tennessee River. But at a place called Shiloh, the blueprint for a quick victory was shredded. In 2 days of savage fighting, more Americans fell than in all previous U.S. wars combined. It was a reality check written in blood. The South realized they couldn't just defend. The North realized the Anaconda wouldn't just squeeze, it would have to bite through bone. By 1863, Lincoln realized that to win the war, he had to destroy the South's ability to wage it. Slavery wasn't just a moral peculiarity, it was the engine of the Confederate economy. The Emancipation Proclamation changed the stakes. It wasn't just about saving the Union anymore, it was about creating a new one. This wasn't just a document, it was a military necessity that turned every Union advance into a mission of liberation, effectively bringing the Anaconda's coils around the heart of the Southern social order. July 1863. The stars aligned for the Union in a single, crushing week. In the East, Lee's gamble at Gettysburg ended in a retreat that would never truly turn back into an offensive. In the West, Grant finally broke Vicksburg. The Mississippi River was now a Union highway, slicing the Confederacy in two. The Anaconda had finally severed the serpent's tail from its head. The South was now isolated, starving, and fighting on borrowed time. 1864 brought a new, terrifying philosophy to the front: total war. William Tecumseh Sherman understood that to end the rebellion, he had to break the Southern will to exist. His march to the sea wasn't just a military parade, it was a psychological wrecking ball. His men didn't just defeat armies, they dismantled the infrastructure of the South. They burned the granaries, slaughtered the livestock, and twisted the very rails of the Confederacy into neckties. The Anaconda wasn't just squeezing now, it was consuming everything in its path. By April 1865, the Confederate heart stopped beating. Surrounded at Appomattox Courthouse, Robert E. Lee realized the inevitable. The North's exhaustion strategy had worked. There were no more boots, no more bullets, and no more hope for a miracle. As the two men met in a quiet parlor, the most violent chapter in American history closed. The Anaconda Plan, once ridiculed as too slow, had proven that in a modern war, the factory is as powerful as the fortress.